I still remember the exact moment my entire world crumbled. It was a Tuesday morning in October, and I was standing in my kitchen, making coffee like I had every morning for the past 12 years. The sunlight was streaming through our bay window, hitting the ceramic mug collection I'd been building since college. Everything felt normal. Everything felt safe. And then David walked in with that look on his face, the one I'd seen 1,000 times before when he was about to deliver news that would change everything. "Sarah," he said, not even looking at me as he grabbed his briefcase from the counter. "I'm leaving you. I've already filed for divorce." Just like that. No build-up, no explanation, no apology. 12 years of marriage, reduced to 2 sentences delivered while he was literally walking out the door. I stood there, coffee mug in hand, watching the man I'd loved since I was 23 years old disappear from my life like he was announcing he'd be late for dinner. But here's what David didn't know, what nobody knew, about the woman he was so casually discarding. He thought he was leaving behind a helpless housewife who'd spent the last decade baking cookies and organizing charity drives. He thought he was walking away from someone who would crumble without him, who would beg him to come back, who would settle for whatever scraps he decided to throw her way in the divorce proceedings. He had no idea who I really was. And honestly, if you're listening to this story and you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed by someone who thought they knew you better than you knew yourself, I hope you'll stick around to hear how this ends. My name is Sarah, and I'm about to tell you about the sweetest revenge I never planned, the kind that happens when someone's arrogance blinds them to the truth right in front of their face. If stories like this resonate with you, I'd love to have you join me on this journey. Hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you're going to want to hear how this unfolds. The thing is, I wasn't always the woman David thought he married. Before I met him, I was Sarah Chen, a quantitative analyst at Goldman Sachs, pulling in a 6-figure salary and managing investment portfolios worth millions. I had my Series 7 license, my CFA designation, and a mind for numbers that had professors at Wharton calling me brilliant. I was the girl who could calculate compound interest in my head while other people were still reaching for their calculators. But when David and I got married, I made a choice that thousands of women make every year. I stepped back from my career to support his. He was starting his own consulting firm, and he needed someone to handle the business side, the networking, the client entertainment. He needed a wife who could host dinner parties, who could charm his clients' wives, who could make our home the kind of place where million-dollar deals got made over brandy and cigars. "You're so good at this," he'd say, watching me work a room full of potential clients. "You're my secret weapon, Sarah. I could never do this without you." And I believed him. I believed that what I was doing mattered, that I was building something with him, that we were a team. I didn't see it as giving up my career. I saw it as investing in our future together. I used my financial background to help him structure deals, to understand the market implications of his recommendations, to spot opportunities that his liberal arts degree couldn't catch. I was his uncredited business partner, his financial advisor, his strategic consultant. But somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me as the brilliant analyst who was choosing to support him. He started seeing me as just another suburban housewife. And honestly, I think he started believing his own narrative. He forgot that I was the one who suggested the investment strategies that tripled his client retention rate. He forgot that I was the one who spotted the market trends that made his firm one of the most profitable in the region. He forgot that every recommendation he made, every successful client outcome, every accolade he received was built on insights I'd whispered in his ear over breakfast. For 12 years, I played the role perfectly. I hosted the dinner parties, I coordinated the charity events, I made sure his shirts were pressed and his schedule was managed. I smiled at his colleagues' wives and pretended to care about their interior decorating choices while mentally calculating the tax implications of their husbands' latest investment decisions. I became invisible in plain sight, the perfect corporate wife who blended into the background of his success. But I never stopped being Sarah Chen, the financial analyst. I just became really good at hiding her. While David was building his reputation and expanding his client base, I was quietly building something else. Every month, I took a portion of the money from his successful deals, money that technically I had earned through my strategic contributions, and I invested it. Not in anything flashy or obvious, but in carefully researched opportunities that my Wall Street training had taught me to recognize. I started with cryptocurrency in 2011, back when David was calling Bitcoin fake money for computer nerds. I put $5,000 into Bitcoin when it was trading at $30. I bought Ethereum when it was $80. I saw the potential in Tesla when it was still a quirky startup that David's friends mocked at dinner parties. I invested in Apple before the iPhone revolution, in Amazon when it was just an online bookstore, in Google when David was still asking me to look things up on Yahoo. I diversified into real estate, buying small rental properties in neighborhoods I knew would gentrify. I got into index funds, international markets, precious metals. I played the long game, the patient game, the smart game. And while David was bragging about his quarterly earnings at the country club, I was quietly building a portfolio that would make his consulting firm look like a lemonade stand. The beautiful thing about being underestimated is that nobody watches you closely enough to notice what you're really doing. David never questioned the monthly transfers from our joint account because he assumed I was buying groceries or getting my hair done. He never wondered why I spent so much time on my laptop because he assumed I was shopping online or reading lifestyle blogs. He never asked about the statements that came in my maiden name because he assumed they were just old credit card offers or alumni solicitations. He saw what he expected to see: a housewife who had given up her career to support him, someone who was grateful for his success, someone who depended on him for everything. And in his mind, that made me safe, predictable, powerless. But dependency is just another word for investment strategy when you're playing the long game. By 2019, my portfolio was worth more than David's entire consulting firm. By 2020, I was making more in passive income than he was making in active business revenue. By 2021, I could have bought his company 3 times over without touching my principal investments. And he had no idea. I didn't tell him because I didn't see the point. We were married. We were supposedly building a life together, and my financial success was our financial success. I wasn't hiding it from him. I was just waiting for the right moment to surprise him. Maybe for our 15th anniversary, or when he was ready to retire, or when we started talking about buying that vacation home in the Hamptons he'd always wanted. I thought I was being generous. I thought I was being patient. I thought I was being a good wife. I had no idea I was being an idiot. The signs were all there, of course. They always are. The late nights at the office that stretched later and later. The business trips that seemed to multiply without any corresponding increase in client base. The way he started dressing differently, caring about his appearance in ways he hadn't since we first started dating. The new cologne, the gym membership, the sudden interest in professional development conferences in cities I'd never heard of. But I trusted him. After 12 years of marriage, I trusted him completely. When he said he was working late, I believed him. When he said he was traveling for business, I believed him. When he said he was stressed about the company and needed space to think, I believed him. I even encouraged him to take those weekend trips to clear his head because I thought I was being supportive. Looking back, I realized that my own success had made me complacent. I was so focused on my investments, so confident in my financial security, so satisfied with my secret accomplishments that I stopped paying attention to the most important relationship in my life. I was winning at everything except the one thing that mattered most, or at least the one thing I thought mattered most. The truth came out the way it always does, accidentally, stupidly, through a mistake that nobody planned. David had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and it buzzed with a text message. I wasn't trying to snoop. I was just glancing over to see if it was something urgent, maybe one of his clients with an emergency. Instead, I saw a message from someone named Kelly with 3 heart emojis in the contact name. The preview showed just enough to make my stomach drop. Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Amanda is at her mom's, so we'll have the whole place to ourselves. Amanda. I knew that name. Kelly's daughter. Kelly, his assistant, who had started working for him 8 months ago. Kelly, who was 26 years old and looked like she belonged in a magazine. Kelly, who I'd met at company parties and thought was sweet and professional and maybe a little naive. Kelly, who was apparently sleeping with my husband in the house she shared with her 6-year-old daughter. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at that phone, and I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, That was expected, but something deeper, something that had been holding me together for 12 years, some fundamental belief about who I was and what my life meant and what I'd built with this man I'd loved and supported and trusted. I wanted to confront him right there. I wanted to scream, to throw his phone at the shower door, to demand explanations and apologies and promises that this was just a mistake, a moment of weakness, something we could work through together. But I didn't. Instead, I did what I'd been trained to do for 20 years in the financial industry. I gathered information. I made copies of everything. I documented patterns. I built a case. And what I found was so much worse than a simple affair. This wasn't some midlife crisis romance that had gotten out of hand. This was a systematic, calculated plan to destroy me. David had been planning this divorce for almost 2 years, carefully moving assets, hiding income, setting up accounts I didn't know about. He'd been transferring money to offshore accounts, underreporting his business income, even taking out loans against the company to make it look less profitable than it actually was. He was preparing to leave me with nothing. The legal documents I found on his computer were like reading a blueprint for my own destruction. His lawyer had advised him to maintain the narrative that I was just a housewife who had contributed nothing to the marriage's financial success. They planned to argue that I deserved only minimal alimony since I had no career, no education, and no financial skills. They were going to paint me as a gold digger who had been living off his hard work for 12 years. But the most devastating part wasn't the financial betrayal. It was the psychological one. In his emails to his lawyer, David described me as dead weight, who had never contributed anything meaningful to my success. He called me financially illiterate and unemployable. He said I was lucky to have lived this lifestyle as long as I have. He actually wrote, and I'll never forget these words, "Sarah has no idea how money works. She's never worked a real job in her life. She'll probably end up living in some tiny apartment working at Target or something. She'll realize pretty quickly that she can't survive without me." Reading that felt like being stabbed in the chest. This was the man I'd loved, the man I'd sacrificed my career for, the man I'd built a life with. And he thought so little of me that he couldn't even imagine I might be capable of taking care of myself. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you an incredible advantage. While David was planning his elaborate betrayal, assuming I was too stupid and helpless to see it coming, I was quietly preparing my own strategy. I called my old contacts on Wall Street. I reached out to law school friends who had gone into family law. I hired a forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering hidden assets. I even hired a private investigator, not because I needed more evidence of the affair, but because I wanted to know everything about David's financial situation, every account, every investment, every hidden asset he thought he was being clever about. And what my team discovered was beautiful in its stupidity. David had been so focused on hiding his assets from me that he'd forgotten about hiding them from the IRS. His offshore accounts were reporting structures that would trigger audits. His underreported income was documented in contracts and correspondence that my forensic accountant found within hours. His loan arrangements were structured in ways that violated SEC regulations for his type of business. My husband, the brilliant consultant, had been so blinded by his arrogance that he'd committed multiple federal crimes while trying to screw me over. But I still wasn't ready to play my hand. I had one more card to play, one more surprise that would make everything else look like child's play. I waited. I played the devastated wife. I cried at the right moments, asked the right questions, acted confused and hurt and dependent. I let him and his lawyer think they were dealing with exactly the kind of woman they expected. Helpless, clueless, and completely out of her depth. The divorce proceedings were scheduled for a Thursday morning in November. David had been so confident about the outcome that he'd actually invited Kelly to move in with him the week before. He'd already put our house on the market, already started talking about his fresh start and his new life with anyone who would listen. The morning of the hearing, I watched him get dressed in his best suit, the one I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary. He was practically humming with excitement, checking his phone constantly, probably texting Kelly about how this was going to be the day that changed everything. "You know, Sarah," he said as he was leaving, "I really hope you'll be reasonable about this. I know you're hurt, but try to remember that I'm not the bad guy here. We just grew apart. It happens." The condescension in his voice was so thick I could have cut it with a knife, but I just nodded and told him I'd see him at the courthouse. What David didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for 8 months. What he didn't know was that I had a legal team that specialized in high-net-worth divorces, the kind of lawyers who normally represented Wall Street executives and Fortune 500 CEOs. What he didn't know was that I'd spent more money on legal preparation than he'd spent on his entire divorce proceedings. Most importantly, what he didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything. Every hidden asset, every undisclosed account, every financial crime, every lie he'd told his lawyer about our marriage and my contributions to his success. The courthouse was one of those old brick buildings that smell like furniture polish and disappointment. David was already there when I arrived, sitting with his lawyer at a mahogany table that looked like it belonged in a gentleman's club. He was wearing that smug smile I'd seen 1,000 times, the one that said he was about to win something important. His lawyer was a middle-aged man named Harrison, who specialized in what he called traditional divorces, which, as far as I could tell, meant screwing over wives who had supported their husbands' careers. He'd barely looked at me during the preliminary meetings, addressing all his questions to David like I was a child who couldn't be trusted to speak for myself. When I walked in with my legal team, I saw David's expression change slightly. He wasn't expecting me to have 3 lawyers. He wasn't expecting me to look calm and confident and completely prepared. "Sarah," he said, standing up like he was greeting an old friend. "You look good. I hope we can keep this civilized." "Of course," I replied, taking my seat across from him. "I'm sure we can work something out that's fair for everyone." The hearing started exactly the way David expected. His lawyer presented their case first, painting me as a dependent spouse who had contributed nothing to the marriage's financial success. He talked about David's entrepreneurial spirit and his remarkable business acumen. He described me as someone who had enjoyed the benefits of her husband's hard work, but had never developed any professional skills of her own. David was nodding along, occasionally shooting me sympathetic looks like he was sorry it had to be this way. But what choice did he have? His lawyer argued that I should receive minimal alimony for a limited time, just enough to get back on my feet and find appropriate employment. "Your Honor," Harrison said, "Mrs. Matthews has been out of the workforce for 12 years. She has no current professional skills, no network, no recent education. She's going to need to start from scratch, and frankly, at her age, her employment prospects are limited. Mr. Matthews is prepared to be generous. He's willing to provide spousal support for 3 years, which should be sufficient time for her to find a job and become self-sufficient." 3 years. 12 years of marriage. And they thought 3 years of minimal support was generous. David was practically glowing with satisfaction. This was going exactly the way he'd planned. Then it was my turn. My lead attorney, Maria Santos, stood up and placed a stack of documents on the table that was at least 6 inches thick. She was a shark in a tailored suit, the kind of lawyer who ate corporate executives for breakfast and billed $700 an hour for the privilege. "Your Honor," she said, "before we discuss any financial arrangements, I think the court should be aware of the complete financial picture of this marriage." She opened the first folder and pulled out a document that made David's face go white. "These are the account statements for Mrs. Matthews's personal investment portfolio," she said, handing copies to the judge and to David's lawyer. "As you can see, Mrs. Matthews has been actively managing investments throughout the marriage with a current portfolio value of approximately $18.7 million. The silence in that courtroom was deafening. I watched David's mouth actually fall open. His lawyer grabbed the documents and started flipping through them frantically, like he was looking for a mistake, some kind of error that would make the numbers make sense. "I'm sorry," Harrison said, "but there must be some mistake. Mrs. Matthews is unemployed. She's been out of the workforce for 12 years. She has no income." "That's incorrect," Maria replied calmly. "Mrs. Matthews has been earning substantial investment income throughout the marriage. Her most recent tax return shows an adjusted gross income of $2.4 million, all from investment gains and dividends." David actually made a sound, like a gasp or a choke, when he heard that number. I looked at him across the table, and for the first time in 12 years, I saw something I'd never seen before. David looking genuinely shocked. "Furthermore," Maria continued, Matthews' portfolio includes several assets that have significant relevance to this divorce proceeding. She pulled out another folder. Mrs. Matthews owns 62% of the outstanding shares of Matthews Consulting Group, Mr. Matthews' company. She purchased these shares gradually over the past 8 years through a series of private transactions that Mr. Matthews apparently forgot about. This was the part I'd been waiting for. The part that made all the humiliation and betrayal and condescension worth it. "What?" David said, actually standing up from his chair. "That's impossible. I own my company. I founded it. I built it." "You founded it with Mrs. Matthews's financial backing," Maria said, pulling out more documents. Mrs. Matthews provided the initial capital investment of $200,000. She guaranteed the business loans. She co-signed the commercial leases. And over the years, when the company needed additional capital, she provided it through a series of convertible loans that automatically converted to equity shares. She handed another stack of papers to the judge. "These are the loan agreements, all signed by Mr. Matthews, acknowledging that these were not gifts, but investments in the company. According to the terms of these agreements, which Mr. Matthews drafted himself, Mrs. Matthews now owns controlling interest in Matthews Consulting Group." The look on David's face was something I'll remember for the rest of my life. It was like watching someone realize they'd been playing checkers while everyone else was playing chess. "Your Honor," Harrison said, clearly scrambling. "My client was not aware." "There's more," Maria interrupted. "Mrs. Matthews also owns the commercial building where Matthews Consulting Group operates, having purchased it through an LLC in 2018. She owns the intellectual property rights to several proprietary analysis methods that the company uses in client presentations. She owns the trademark to the company name, which she registered in 2019. Each revelation was like watching David get punched in the gut. He was looking at me with this expression of complete bewilderment, like he'd discovered that his pet goldfish was actually a shark. "How is this possible?" he asked. Not to his lawyer, not to the judge, but to me. "Sarah, how is this possible?" I looked at him across that courtroom, this man who had called me dead weight and financially illiterate, who had planned to leave me with nothing, who had underestimated me so completely that he'd handed me control of his entire life without even realizing it. "I used to be a quantitative analyst at Goldman Sachs," I said quietly. "I have a master's degree in finance from Wharton. I've been investing professionally for 20 years. I know exactly how money works." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. David just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "But you never told me," he said finally. "You never asked," I replied. "You assumed. You saw what you wanted to see. You thought that because I was supporting your career, I must not be capable of having my own." Maria wasn't done yet. "Your Honor, there's one more matter the court should be aware of. During the course of our investigation, we discovered that Mr. Matthews has been systematically hiding assets and underreporting income in preparation for this divorce. We've documented approximately $4.2 million in undisclosed assets, including offshore accounts, cryptocurrency holdings, and underreported business income." She placed another folder on the table. "We've also discovered that Mr. Matthews has been systematically defrauding his business clients by inflating fees and providing investment advice that primarily benefited his own portfolio rather than his clients' interests. We have evidence of at least 12 instances of securities fraud, tax evasion, and breach of fiduciary duty." David's lawyer was frantically whispering in his ear, but David wasn't listening. He was just staring at me with this expression of complete and total defeat. "Mrs. Matthews has already turned this information over to the SEC, the IRS, and the FBI," Maria continued. "Federal investigators are expected to issue indictments within the next few weeks." That was when David finally understood. He wasn't just losing the divorce. He was losing everything. His company, his assets, his freedom, his future. The woman he'd thought was helpless and clueless had just systematically destroyed his entire life. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this." I looked at him sitting there, this man who had thrown away 12 years of love and partnership for a 26-year-old assistant, who had called me worthless and deadweight, who had planned to leave me with nothing. You're right, I said. We can work this out. I'm prepared to be very reasonable. His face lit up with hope. I'll give you 5% of the company, I said. You can keep working there as a junior consultant under my supervision. I'll allow you to keep your personal checking account and your car. I'll even let you stay in the guest house behind our home. Well, my home now, while you look for an apartment you can afford. The hope died in his eyes as quickly as it had appeared. As for alimony, I continued, I think you're right that 3 years is reasonable. I'll pay you $1,500 a month for 3 years, which should be enough for you to get back on your feet and find appropriate employment. I used his own words, his own condescending tone, his own devastating dismissal of everything I'd contributed to our marriage. $1,500? He said. Sarah, that's nothing. That won't even cover rent in this city. It's very generous, I replied, echoing his lawyer's earlier words. At your age, with your limited skills and your upcoming criminal charges, your employment prospects are quite limited. You'll need to start from scratch. The judge was trying not to smile. I could see it in his eyes. This was exactly the kind of poetic justice that made his job worthwhile. Mrs. Matthews, he said, are you prepared to finalize these terms? I am, Your Honor. Mr. Matthews, do you accept these terms? David looked at his lawyer, who just shrugged helplessly. There was no negotiating out of this. I held all the cards, owned all the assets, and had all the evidence. He could accept my terms, or he could spend the next decade in federal prison with nothing. I accept, he said quietly. The whole thing was over in less than an hour. 12 years of marriage dissolved with the stroke of a pen and the reading of some very devastating financial statements. As we walked out of the courthouse, David caught up to me in the parking lot. Sarah, he said, I need to understand something. When did you plan all this? When did you start building this portfolio? How long have you been preparing for this moment? I stopped and turned to look at him. This man who had shared my bed for 12 years, but had never really known me at all. I didn't plan any of this, I said. I built that portfolio because I'm good with money, and I wanted to contribute to our future together. I bought shares in your company because I believed in you, and I wanted to help you succeed. I did everything I did because I loved you, and I thought we were building something together. I paused, watching him process this information. The only thing I planned was my response to your betrayal. Everything else was just me being the woman I've always been, the woman you never bothered to get to know. He stood there in the parking lot, looking lost and confused and smaller than I'd ever seen him. What happens now? He asked. Now you figure out how to build a life with what you have left, I said, just like you expected me to do. I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing there in the courthouse parking lot, probably for the first time in his life, truly understanding what it meant to be underestimated. The aftermath was even more satisfying than the divorce itself. Within 2 weeks, federal agents raided David's office and froze all his remaining assets. He was indicted on 14 counts of securities fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly everyone in our social circle knew exactly what kind of man they'd been admiring all these years. Kelly, his young assistant, disappeared faster than morning mist. Turns out she wasn't interested in dating a broke criminal defendant who was about to spend the next decade in federal prison. She sent him a text message breaking up with him, the same way he'd announced our divorce to me, casually and without explanation. I sold Matthews Consulting Group to a larger firm for $32 million. Most of David's clients chose to stay with the new company, which meant they never really valued his particular expertise anyway. They just wanted good financial advice, and they were happy to get it from professionals who weren't going to steal from them. I bought a house in the Hamptons, the one David had always dreamed of owning. I furnished it with art and antiques and a library filled with books about finance and investing. I created a home office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, where I manage my portfolio and advise other women who want to build financial independence. But the best part isn't the money or the house or the satisfaction of watching David's world crumble. The best part is rediscovering who I am when I'm not pretending to be someone else. I'm Sarah Chen again, the brilliant analyst who can calculate compound interest in her head. I'm the woman who saw the potential in Bitcoin when it was $30 and Tesla when it was a startup. I'm the investor who built an $18 million portfolio while everyone around me thought I was just baking cookies and organizing charity drives. I'm the woman who played the long game so well that I won without even realizing I was playing. David sent me a letter from federal prison last month. He's serving 8 years for fraud and tax evasion, and he'll be eligible for parole in 5 years if he maintains good behavior. The letter was full of apologies and explanations and promises that he'd learned his lesson and would never underestimate anyone again. But the last paragraph was what really got to me. He wrote, "I know I hurt you, and I know I destroyed everything we built together, but I need you to understand that I really did love you. I just never knew who you were." I threw the letter away without responding, not because I was angry. I stopped being angry months ago, but because there was nothing left to say. He was right. He never knew who I was, and that was his choice, not mine. I chose to love him completely, to support him unconditionally, to build a life with him based on partnership and mutual respect. He chose to see what he wanted to see, to take what he wanted to take, to dismiss what he didn't understand. In the end, that choice cost him everything. These days, I spend my time doing what I love most, analyzing markets, identifying opportunities, building wealth not just for myself, but for other women who want to take control of their financial futures. I've started a consulting firm that specializes in helping women navigate divorce proceedings, particularly women who have been underestimated by their husbands and their husbands' lawyers. You'd be amazed how many women are sitting on hidden talents, forgotten skills, and undervalued contributions. Women who stepped back from careers to support their families, who channeled their intelligence into unpaid labor, who built their husband's success while everyone pretended they were just along for the ride. The most rewarding part of my work isn't helping these women get fair financial settlements, although that's important. It's watching them rediscover who they are when they stop pretending to be who everyone else expects them to be. I think about David sometimes, sitting in his prison cell, probably finally understanding that the dead weight he discarded was actually the foundation that held his entire life together. I wonder if he's figured out that the woman he thought was financially illiterate was actually the financial genius who made his success possible. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. I'm too busy being the woman I was always meant to be, the woman I never stopped being, even when everyone around me forgot she existed. If you're listening to this story and you recognize yourself in it, if you're someone who has been underestimated, overlooked, or taken for granted, I want you to know something important. You are not invisible. Your contributions matter. Your intelligence matters. Your worth is not determined by other people's ability to see it. And if you're in a situation where someone is trying to diminish you, dismiss you, or convince you that you're less capable than you know you are, remember this. The people who underestimate you are giving you the most powerful weapon you could ever have. They're giving you the element of surprise. Use it wisely. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew you better than you knew yourself? Have you ever had to prove your worth to someone who should have valued you from the beginning? What was your moment of quiet triumph? Your own version of reading assets aloud in a courtroom while someone's world crumbled around them? Share your stories. Let's celebrate the moments when the underestimated become the underestimators. Let's remind each other that being overlooked is not the same as being powerless. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is simply revealing who you've always been.